Welcome to the Great Basin Fire Potential Briefing for Friday, June 22nd. This is Gina McGuire. Over the next couple of days, we will have some gusty winds and unstable conditions to deal with, especially across the eastern half of Utah today, and then over much of eastern, central, and southern Utah on Saturday, ahead of an area of low pressure that's dropping south. We will have no significant impacts as we move into Sunday, and winds will decrease across the Great Basin. Otherwise, very hot and dry conditions will continue across the southern two-thirds of the region over the next week. Over the last 24 hours, we've had scattered amounts of lightning over the central Idaho mountains into parts of Wyoming, and we have had some precipitation with these thunderstorms. Further south, dry conditions continue. Great Basin fire activity yesterday was light across the area with a few new starts into mainly Utah and over far western Nevada. Over the last 7 days, the precipitation has mainly been focused over the northern half of the Great Basin across Idaho and Wyoming, with lighter amounts further south into Nevada and Utah. And over the southern half of the area, very dry conditions have continued over the last 1 to 2 weeks or longer. How this has affected our current fuel conditions: ERCs have rebounded from the cooler wet weather we saw about a week ago, have increased back to the 80th to 90th percentile over eastern, central, and southern Utah and the Arizona Strip and into parts of southern Nevada. ERCs elsewhere across Nevada and northern Utah are on the rise and are now above the 50th percentile. However, ERCs are still low across Idaho as we still continue to see some impacts from moisture moving across the region. Looking at our live fuel moisture conditions, sagebrush fuel moistures have peaked across Idaho and Nevada and Utah and are on the downward trend. However, are still above normal over much of the northern half of Nevada into much of Idaho and Wyoming, with the exception of southwest Idaho where sagebrush live fuel moisture is below normal. Over the rest of eastern and southern Utah into the Arizona Strip, live fuel moistures are well below normal and still near historical lows. The satellite loop from this morning shows a trough of low pressure swinging east across the Great Basin. We will see another low dropping south over the next couple of days, which will impact mainly Idaho, Wyoming, and Utah, bringing some gusty winds. However, in the meantime, dry and warm conditions will continue across the Great Basin, especially across Nevada, Utah, and the Arizona Strip, where temperatures will be at least 10 degrees above normal. Now looking at the weather pattern for later this afternoon, generally dry conditions are expected across the Great Basin today, with the exception of possibly a few showers up over central Idaho. Fire potential remains low in the north and moderate over southern and eastern areas, and today we will still see breezy winds mainly across the central Utah mountains up into the Uinta Basin. Therefore, we have a high risk for gusty winds and low humidity in those regions. Relative humidity will drop into the single digits across much of Nevada, Utah, and the Arizona Strip, and drop to between 20 and 30% across Idaho. We will see those gusty northwest winds across Idaho, Wyoming, and down into the eastern half of Utah. So again, it's across the eastern half of Utah where the low relative humidity will combine with the winds and also the very critical fuels that will increase fire potential today. As we move into Saturday, we see another low drop south across central Idaho into Wyoming, and this will bring some showers and thunderstorms again to the north, but also a return to stronger winds just south of that area of low pressure across much of Utah. Therefore, we have broadened the area of high risk for gusty winds and low relative humidity for much of the southern and eastern half of Utah down into the Arizona Strip. Otherwise, very dry conditions and hot temperatures will continue across Nevada. Looking at relative humidity on Saturday, generally single digits over the southern half of the Great Basin to teens over northern Utah and Nevada, and then still a little bit higher across Idaho. You can see the image on the right how those winds really increase on Saturday. Generally northwest winds over the northern half of Utah and southwest winds over the southern half of Utah and the Arizona Strip with gusts above 35 or 40 miles per hour. Looking at Sunday, the ridge of high pressure now moves a little bit further east, pushing that low off into the Rockies. Therefore, winds will be decreasing and we will see dry weather with hot temperatures region-wide. Fire potential remains moderate over the southern half of the Great Basin, but will be increasing in northern areas as we move through the weekend and next week. Relative humidity, generally single digits to teens across much of the southern two-thirds of the Great Basin and still a little bit higher up north, but even over southwest Idaho now we're seeing some relative humidities drop below 20%. Wind gusts on Sunday will decrease across the region, still be breezy somewhat over the higher terrain of Utah with northwest wind gusts around 25 miles per hour, but certainly lighter than we'll see the next couple of days. The 3-day overall forecast amount of precipitation targets mainly central Idaho into Wyoming with those showers and thunderstorms, maybe even a few isolated thunderstorms as we move into Saturday across far northern and northeast Utah, but those thunderstorms would likely not produce much precipitation. As we go into early next week, we will continue with those very hot and dry conditions across the Great Basin. And really the main story over the next week is going to be the very warm and dry conditions rapidly drying out our fuels across Nevada, Utah, and the Arizona Strip, and possibly into southern Idaho. So very little weather on Monday. We may see a few thunderstorms possibly start to develop in the central Sierra, but they would be very isolated and not producing much precipitation. Otherwise, moderate fire potential remains over southern areas and low fire potential to the north. On Tuesday, very similar pattern, maybe winds a little bit breezier with drier conditions up across Idaho, however still above normal temperatures and dry conditions for the Great Basin. May see a few buildups on Tuesday over parts of northern Utah into northeast Nevada, but again these would be isolated and we likely would not see much precipitation. Otherwise, we will continue to dry out the fuels as we go through early next week. By Wednesday, we do have a weak trough of low pressure moving into northern California, so we may again see some isolated thunderstorms possibly over southern Idaho into northern Utah. Right now, coverage remains pretty low with generally dry and warm conditions. And then as we move into Thursday, that trough swings a little bit further east, so we may see winds pick up a little bit out ahead of that trough over the eastern half of the Great Basin and a better potential for showers and thunderstorms in the north. We are seeing, again, that significant drying of the fuels, therefore our fire potential will be increasing across the Great Basin through the next week. The only precipitation really over the next 7 days, again, is over Idaho and Wyoming, possibly into far northern Utah, however that would be fairly light. The 8 to 14-day outlook, taking us into the first week in July, shows above normal temperatures in almost all areas, with below normal precipitation across much of Idaho into Nevada. We may see that above normal precipitation trend start in the southwest as the monsoon likely will begin developing towards the first and second week of July. So a slight delay from what we would normally see, but that moisture eventually will push up into Utah, probably closer to the middle of July. That concludes our webcast for today. Check back tomorrow for the latest updates.